All right. Hopefully you all can hear me okay. So my name is Senna, and I did change the title of my talk to Tips and Tricks for GitHub Copilot. So hopefully this way you'll walk away with a little bit more takeaways, like in some tangent tips. I'm just going to do a quick introduction, talk about the whole landscape of AI-paired programming tools, because there's actually a lot in this space, and then cover how Copilot works, how you can prompt it, some different strategies you can use, and we'll have some time for Q&A as well. Thank you for the introduction. I work at GitHub. I have a background in some front end and some accessibility, and now I work as a solutions engineer, and I help people get the most out of the different GitHub products that we have, like including Copilot 2. That's been a huge focus of mine recently because, it's a hot topic, and there's a ton of tools that people can use. So I saw a good amount, maybe like half of you have been using Copilot or something else. But show of hands, are you all familiar with Copilot, or are you using any other AI-paired programming tools? Okay, cool. I see a few hands raised. So, the first time I did a presentation like this, I think GitHub Copilot was really the only one with a new kind of chat experience. And there's a lot of other really cool companies out there, like Replit with their Ghostwriter tool, Codium, Amazon Code Whisperer, Tab9, StarCoder, and Hugging Face are making something really interesting with SafeCoder. But these are more code completion tools. So you can get auto-completion if you're just coding in your IDE. They will auto-complete based on what you're doing. Or you can prompt with a natural language comment, which is what I'm going to cover a lot of. But now, really, a lot of these tools in the first category actually have chat functionality within the IDE. So that can give you more of a ChatGPT style experience, where you can have more of a conversation. You can tell it to iterate on the suggestions that you've been giving, and it's really helpful with the learning process if you're working with a new framework or trying to prototype something, do some debugging if something isn't working the way you expect. That chat experience is really helpful and very, very cool. With any emerging tech, we typically see a learning curve, and there's a lot of questions that come up. So hopefully this will help out in that space. And I also want to say that what I'm going to talk about, it's specific to Copilot, but I assume that you can kind of take these practices and use them with any other AI. This is an assumption, but I'm sure it can apply to using other IDE tools too. What are we aiming to achieve here? What were we aiming to achieve here? With GitHub Copilot, we really wanted to increase developer satisfaction, so allow people to do more with the time that they have. It's not an autopilot. It's not supposed to write correct, complete, perfectly high-quality code. It's not really going to do that. It's a Copilot, so it can help you write some boilerplate code, help you automate certain repetitive tasks that you're doing, but also bridge skill gaps. So if you're, learning a new framework, working in a legacy code base that you might not know what's going on, or it's not documented really well, this is where it can be super helpful. So just want to set expectations with Copilot not being an autopilot. So how does this work? If anybody isn't familiar with Copilot, it is GitHub Copilot in particular, because there's Microsoft has lots of different Copilots too, and elsewhere in their stack. But it's an IDE plugin, and it is supported in Visual Studio, VS Code, NeoVim, and JetBrains IDEs. And the way you can prompt it with this auto-completion model is you'll start typing, it will take in the context of the file that you have open. It'll look at the code that comes before and after your cursor, as well as the other tabs you have open. So it's going to take in the context of the other tabs you've got, not just the file that you have open. And how you can prompt it is you can you can start a comment, tell it that you want to do something, or you can just start writing a function. But if you say something like, get the average runtime of successful runs in seconds, then it will, return a function for you based on how well you prompt it. And so we need to basically process this context, that context being, like I said, the file you have, as well as the other 3 tabs that are open over here. And we use our own model, this OpenAI GPT 3.5 Turbo model. It used to be called Codex, but sometimes the name changes, so that's what we're calling it. It's in our own GitHub-owned Azure tenant, but we will take that context and give you the best possible suggestion, based on the whole prompt that it has. So that's how the auto-completion model works. And then there's chat. This is something we released in beta for our business product, but also individuals. So you can now use this if you have an individual license. But it's a chat interaction, and it takes in the same context. So whereas with ChatGPT, you kind of just have to prompt it with the context, with whatever you tell it, it just goes and runs with that. But with chat, it also takes in the files you have open, the code you're editing, so you can highlight snippets of code and kind of focus it on that prompt. But yeah, this is really cool. I'm really excited about these chat tools in general, especially the ones that have the context of the files you have open. So what is prompt crafting? To get started, just a real life scenario that can kind of paint a picture of why this is very important. So let's say that you want to plan a trip to California or Amsterdam, and you're working with a travel agent. And if you just tell them, hey, I really want to go to this city, I need plane tickets, I need a hotel, and you just kind of give them that information, maybe a date that you want to travel just for 2 people without any further details. It's going to give you, it'll give you some answers, either if you're talking to a person or you're using some sort of other travel-based chat tool. But that conversation can be drawn out for a lot longer than if you just gave it very specific information. What's your budget? What dates do you want to go? What are your possible destinations? Do you want to go to LA? Do you want to go to San Francisco? What timelines do you need? And if you are okay with layovers or nonstops, the more you prompt this type of service, the more accuracy you're going to get out of it. So that's what we're trying to convey here, is that, however specific and well you can create a prompt, it's going to directly impact the quality, the consistency, and the accuracy of the suggestion you'll have. So this is the type of thing we're talking about it in the context of prompt crafting for a developer. It'll be a different concept if you're talking to a machine learning engineer, but this is for code completion tools within your IDE. But yeah, if you use ChatGPT, you're probably familiar with what can it interpret as a prompt. For Copilot in particular, it can be a question, it can be a statement in a natural language comment, or it can just be code that you have in your files, or whatever you've put in a Copilot Chat window. And also Copilot, our LLM, it's a giant probability machine, so it's not you're going to get the same deterministic response every time. You'll probably get different suggestions, with different ways that you prompt it. So that's something that you can expect as well. And what I'll talk about, it's in these 4 pillars of writing an effective prompt. So context, Without the right context, you're not going to get a suggestion that's like really tailored to what you want. There's intent, so identifying your end goal. So for example, if you want to create like a calculator app that you want it to calculate sine, cosine, tangent, it'll take that into account when it's giving you certain classes. Clarity, so you want to avoid ambiguous language, and specificity. So yeah, the more specific you are, the more it'll generate more relevant and accurate responses for you. So if you wanted to use a particular library, it would make sense to actually specify the version of a library that you're intending to use. So these things are the themes. They're pretty important. And some patterns that you should use to get Copilot to help you code. These are kind of like common sense, but like you want to be very descriptive in a few things like variable names, method signatures, and like make sure you're using naming conventions specifically or consistently. So for the variable name example, like if you want to make a Zoom integration to track like how many attendees were in your webinar, you want to like name that variable something like total attendees. Or if you are writing a method signature, you need it to be a descriptive name and make your parameters very clear and descriptive too, and the types that they have. And being able to just have consistent ways of defining variables will help Copilot too. So if you have things that are not up to your own standards, then Copilot is not going to give you something up to your own standards as well. Also, Copilot Chat in particular, like if you're having a problem with this, or if you're working in a legacy code base and things are kind of like all over the place, you can use Chat for help in fixing that too. It's actually really helpful for refactoring code. So you can highlight an entire function, like this get Zoom attendees example, and say, hey, can you refactor these to be more descriptive in what they represent? And it'll actually be able to figure out what you likely were intending. And yeah, you can use it as a tool to help you refactor things too. How can these be related to creating prompts? So if you, there's many ways of interacting with Copilot. Maybe you're just writing something and you're expecting it to autocomplete for you. Maybe you just want it to generate like a lot of different things if you're working in a new framework, but you can also just like prompt it and be very deliberate and tell it exactly what you want it to do. So if you're doing something like that, what you should do is define like what types of inputs and outputs you're expecting. So you can write something in a comment and say, write a function that like takes in an array as an input and returns like something if returns true if a particular thing was found. Same thing with errors. You should tell it exactly like exit where the input is empty and throw an error if the input like isn't an integer. Just being very descriptive there as well. And if you're writing loops and defining different types of exceptions, just tell it how to find like the first prime number given a list of integers, and if it doesn't do what you expect, then it needs to exit it. So these are the types of ways that you can prompt it with a natural language comment, but you just need to be specific. And then in the next section, we'll talk about some interesting techniques that we found that have been really helpful. So something that folks have been trying out is if you're starting a new file, just documenting at the top of the file like what your overall intention is really helpful. So in this example, we are trying to create an application that like looks at weather metrics based on like the U.S. National Weather Agency based on a zip code, and this all gets taken into consideration as a prompt. So you say, this is what I want to do. I want to retrieve the weather for a 7-day forecast, use API calls asynchronously, import these libraries, import this particular file, and just really like describe what it is that you want to happen. And so if you tell it step by step as well, specifically like what you expect to happen, and like in each part of the function, then it'll be able to like take that and give you more of a, like if you weren't to basically tell it these different steps, then it would just leave room for it to kind of give you things all over the place. So just communicating like specifically how you want to store things, how you want to use the parameters, what types of variables you're going to be using. That is what we find that to be really helpful. Just putting that there, and as you're like typing things out, it'll be able to autocomplete more accurately. So this is a really good thing to try out. And yeah, in terms of like the types of data structures that you want to be using, you can tell it like, do you guys hear that? You can tell it specifically like what types of data it should expect to receive and return and like modify based on what your requirements are. And also if you're using a new library, what you can do is just like take a look at that library's documentation and just copy and paste it like in a comment, and then it'll take that into account. So yeah, being really specific on what you expect it to return and like what it has to take as an input is really helpful too. And yeah, like I mentioned before, it takes in the other files that you have open. So it's not just the file you're working in. For example, if you are writing a new function and you want to write some tests for it, then as long as you have the file that you just opened up there, right, so yeah, if you just write a new function and you want to write some tests for it, having those tabs open that you've used or that you need to use in the future, like it could just basically predict exactly what you want to write a test for. So like, yeah, different services, libraries, methods that you've defined elsewhere, like that all basically gets calculated, and it figures out like what is most relevant to basically compose a prompt and give you a suggestion. And by the way, you can also just open like any local file. It's not like it has a concept of your repository. Like you can open up a markdown file that has all of your standards or like a way that you should use some internal tool, and it'll learn from that. So it's really like all in the way that you prompt it, and it's really powerful to open up like different tabs that you see is necessary. And yeah, in talking to people at this conference, like it seems like there's some people just aren't getting the suggestions that they would expect. So definitely what I recommend is keep experimenting with your prompts. If you write a comment and you're not really getting what you were intending on, just try doing it again, add some more details, be more specific, add things step by step, talk about your overall intent, and yeah, just keep experimenting with it. And it's really good if you're iterating, and especially if you're using chat. There's been some cases where it will recommend a component that's like deprecated in a particular library. If you just say, hey, like this is deprecated, this isn't what I wanted, it'll apologize and give you what you actually need. So it's really helpful to just tell it to iterate and like fix something that it's done. Yeah, and if you're using Copilot Chat in particular, but you can also use the same practice if you're just like using natural language comments. But think about the way you would work with somebody else if you're pair programming. Think about like how you would approach the problem with somebody else. if you don't understand what a certain piece of code is doing, you can always ask it to explain things to you, and it'll give you suggestions for like optimizing or fixing a bug. So you can kind of think about it like that as well. And the same things apply, like the same pillars of context. This is super important. Being clear, stating your overall intent, and being very specific will help there. That being said, though, we also are trying to make it easier for folks to just do something quick, like these actions that we're seeing that are pretty common. So things like explaining a particular snippet of code with chat, as well as just like normal keyboard shortcuts. You can use something like /explain. It tells you how something works, and you can really start to see like how the service is thinking about your code. You can use a / command to automatically generate tests for something too, which is really helpful. I also find the /fix interaction to be really interesting, because if you get like a security vulnerability alert, like a static analysis alert or code quality, and you have something like Copilot or any other tool really to like point to a particular area, it can find a really quick way to like help you fix something as well. So I find this to be really helpful. And we just rolled out something recently for VS Code called Workspace. So you can actually just ask it to like kickstart an app, like create something based on a particular file structure that you need. So yeah, I would check out these types of things too. And there's many use cases of using Copilot, but usually if you're like starting out a new project with chat, or if you are working on an existing project, there's like different ways we recommend interacting with it. So if you're starting out a new project, using something like Create Workspace can generate like a nice file structure for you just to start with. Ask it to implement, like how to do something, like how to implement a new feature, how to use a particular library, like what do you recommend is the right tool to use here. After you write some code, asking it to just generate tests really quickly with the particular testing library you want to work with. That's like a repetitive task that it can be really helpful with. And also documentation, by the way, like it knows how to tell you what's going on with a project, so you can actually just ask it to do the reverse and like generate some documentation to like throw in a markdown file. I found a lot of success in this too, so it can be really helpful with just generating some markdown too. And if you're working with an existing code base, using things like explain, helping you fix existing issues in a legacy code base, always making sure to have like relevant files open that are related to what you're trying to do, and using it to refactor code, as well as translate. It can also translate things into a different language as well. So we have teams that are trying to like lift and shift to something else, and they're actually just asking it to like translate different things just to get one step ahead. Hopefully these tips were useful for you. I think we have about 15 minutes left, so I'm happy to go into Q&A if there are any questions. And also we'll pause on this slide just for like helpful resources that we can share.